There are a lot of opportunities that we're going to have to show the differences, and we need to do that. We need to be ready to, and I think we will be. We have to recruit really good candidates. You can't just run.
Rattle Wall Street.
Everybody in Washington now agrees that China is a bad actor doing bad things.
We'll discuss trade talks, the arrest of a top Chinese executive, and what it means for the U.S. economy, with one of the president's top advisors, Larry Kudlow. Then, a week of dramatic revelations in Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. What do the court filings show, and what does it mean for the president?
I think it's all turning around very nicely. There's absolutely no collusion, which is very important.
Senator Angus King, a key member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, joins us. Plus,
we do not want to let a Trump temper tantrum govern our policies or cause the shutdown of the government.
I don't think the president's bluffing.
We'll ask our Sunday panel if a government shutdown over President Trump's border wall is now unavoidable. And our Power Player of the Week.
The pilot said, "We have to go. Tom, you stay here, you die. You join Jesse."
One American hero's act of devotion you'll never forget.
Tom shouted at the cockpit. He said, "Jesse, we'll be back for you somehow, someday."
All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. The Trump administration is getting a makeover. On his way to the Army-Navy game yesterday, the president announced Chief of Staff John Kelly will leave by the end of the year. Meanwhile, uncertainty over the U.S.-China trade deal is casting a shadow over an economy that has been a bright spot for the administration. Joining us now, President Trump's top White House economic advisor, Larry Kudlow. Larry, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
In July, just a couple of months ago, President Trump said that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly would remain on the job through 2020. Now he says that Kelly is out as one of the top few White House staffers. What happened?
Well, look, it's been a long 2 years for the chief, General Kelly. He ran Homeland Security and has been running the White House staff. I think, by the way, he's been a very good chief, very orderly processes in the White House. As you know, it's not an easy thing to do. General Kelly is a remarkable patriot. He has given such phenomenal service to this country. Perhaps it is time for a rest. President Trump, at our senior staff Christmas dinner Friday night, had some wonderful complimentary things to say about the chief. I heartily concur. So I suppose it's time to move on.
Well, let me ask you two more quick questions. One, did Kelly resign or was he forced out?
I don't know, to be perfectly honest. I think it was very amicable. All right, that's what I understand. Again, the president's saying good things about the chief. I've been in so many meetings. I mean, just so many meetings in my tenure, a little less than a year now. I think a lot of the gossip is just wrong. I think they did get along. Everybody's going to have disagreements. That's the way life works. But was he fired? I don't think he was fired. I wasn't privy to that final conversation. But the president's had great things to say about him.
What do you think of Nick Ayers?
I think quite a lot of Nick Ayers, actually. I've known him for a while. President, I guess, will let us know tomorrow or sometime early in the week who the next chief is going to be. In terms of Nick Ayers, Mike Pence's chief of staff, I think the world of him.
All right, let's turn to your day job. The stock market's had a terrible week since President Trump and President Xi had dinner in Argentina on Saturday night. The Dow lost 1,100 points, or 4.5%. The S&P 500 is now in the red for 2018. Question, how much of this is because of confusion over just what the U.S. and China have agreed to?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'll grant you that, trade issues, China trade issues, haven't been all buttoned down yet. But look, Chris, the first couple of days after that dinner, I was down there at G20 Argentina. The markets did very well. both in China and the U.S., as a matter of fact. Since then, there have been some issues. The Huawei issue, that's a technology company that was violating Iranian sanctions, and Canada has taken them in, and they'll probably be extradited to the U.S. There have been some different statements here and there. Look, I can just tell you right now, we are on track. China has finally, I mean, Wednesday and Thursday, China's Commerce Department issued some very positive, promising statements. Sometimes I think these things get lost, maybe the beautiful funeral of former President Bush, but they said, look, they agree with the timetable, they agree with the deadlines, they expect to be moving immediately to take actions on key commodities, for example, by lowering tariffs and opening up export sales for us, things like energy, agriculture, industry. Something like 35 Chinese agencies and the Supreme Court are now working on new legislation to deal with the IP theft issues and other technology issues.
Larry, the reason...
So when you piece it together, Chris, there's a lot of good things out there, and I think sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle.
Well, here's part of the reason it got lost and why it took till Wednesday or Thursday to people find out about it, because there are big differences between how the president and the White House is describing what was agreed to and what the Chinese are saying was agreed to. And let me put a couple of them up. The U.S. says China agreed to, quote, very substantial purchases of agricultural and other products. The Chinese say nothing specific about how big those purchases will be. President Trump says the Chinese will remove their 40% tariff on U.S. auto imports. The Chinese are ducking that one. And then there's the difference between what you and White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro had to say on Friday about that 90-day deadline for a suspension of tariff increases. Take a look.
The president has indicated if there's good, solid movement and some good action, he might be willing to extend the 90 days. We'll have to see on that.
If they're not resolved in 90 days, is this administration willing to walk away?
It's not a question of walking away. It's a question of moving forward on the strategy.
That contradiction between you and Peter Navarro led to a 500-point drop in the Dow on Friday. Forget the Chinese. The White House can't seem to get its own story straight.
Well, with all respect, I don't think there's much daylight between Peter and I. We are focused right now on this first 90-day increment. Regarding what may happen in the future and presidential considerations, that'll be up to POTUS, of course, working with President Xi. I really think that's an exaggerated point. But, Chris, look, I understand people are looking for these issues. Let me just read very quickly. Here was the Chinese Commerce Department announcement. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. China will immediately implement specific issues that have been agreed upon by agriculture products, energy, and automobiles. Automobile tariffs announcement is going to come from the State Council Tariff Commission. As I said earlier, it was also announced that a number of Chinese government agencies and the Supreme Court are looking at new laws to prevent intellectual property theft. These are very strong indications. President Trump himself, I remember he called me early Thursday morning to say, did you see that announcement? Did you see that announcement? And I did, and I think it's very positive. Really, we're making more progress now on more specific issues than ever before. Now, let me just add quickly, trust but verify. That's very important. Ambassador Lighthizer will be looking very carefully in the course of his negotiations. He will evaluate. He will make sure there are enforcement mechanisms and timetable mechanisms. Right. That is terribly important. Nothing in this game is done until it is absolutely verified to our satisfaction. So that's a caveat.
Okay,
I don't want to lose that. However, but having said that, the Chinese own statements are really very positive.
Okay. Well, except that, for instance, the president tweeted 40%. A tariff on auto imports is lifted. The Chinese have not committed to that. And there was a big bump in the road on Saturday night. President Xi and President Trump are sitting there having dinner together. You're at the table with them. And suddenly there's the arrest last Saturday of Meng Wen Zhou, the chief financial officer of telecom giant Huawei, as you say, for allegedly violating U.S. sanctions on trade with China. Couple of quick questions. One, did President Trump know about that arrest when he sat down to dinner with President Xi? And if not, what was his reaction afterwards?
He did not know. He did not know, and he had no reaction afterward.
Well, the reports have been that he was livid, and frankly, just as an outsider, if one of the top businessmen in the other person's country was being arrested while I'm making nice at dinner, I'd be livid.
He didn't know, okay? I'll just state that unequivocally. He learned way later, by the way, way later. Look, regarding the Huawei prosecution, let me just say that's a law enforcement action. That's primarily Department of Justice. It is a very important issue because the evidence suggests, at least so far, the alleging suggests that Huawei did break the Iranian sanction through different financial channels. We will see how that plays out. That's a enforcement channel.
Can I just ask you a question about how
we're talking about it?
I just want to ask you one question about how it plays out, if I may, Larry. Republican Senator Marco Rubio said this week after the arrest that Huawei, a telecom giant, is a bad actor. Here is Rubio.
Knowing the history of Huawei and how it served as an instrument of Chinese espionage and influence, it's concerning, but you know, if we have a case to be made, the right thing to do is to charge her, and the right thing to do for Canada is to extradite her.
But now China is warning the U.S. and Canada, where she is being held, that there will be consequences if she continues to be held. And one of the top papers in China, the Global Times, says that her arrest amounts to a declaration of war. Can you guarantee me that as part of this negotiation, the president, the administration, will not let her go?
Chris, I can't guarantee anything. As I say, this is a DOJ, NSC law enforcement issue. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I'm not an attorney. It's outside my lane. So we will see. Look, the U.S. has laws about these things. The U.S. has a number of laws on the books now that protect a number of points. I mean, not only violations of sanctions, be it Iran or other countries, we have laws about anything that was stolen. We're discussing laws. People can't do business in the U.S. or sell us goods, services, intellectual property that we think was stolen. So that's just being tough and protecting the family jewels, in my judgment, and that's protecting the integrity of U.S. national security policy. Very, very important. How this affects trade, Chris? I can't sit here and be absolutely definitive. All I'll say is it seems to me there's a trade lane that we are discussing where you and I both agree the early returns from China are very positive, and it looks like we will get new actions. And there's a law enforcement lane. They're different. They're different. And I think President Trump and President Xi and lower officials will generate or continue to keep that difference. I might be wrong. I can't predict the future on this thing, but they're different channels, and I think they will be viewed that way for quite some time.
Larry, thank you. Thanks for your time, and we'll watch how the markets do this week.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss the departure of White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and other shakeups in the administration.
We'll be leaving at the end of the year. We'll be announcing who will be taking John's place. It might be on an interim basis.
By 2002, the wear and tear is written all over her face.
President Trump announcing on his way to the Army-Navy game, he's letting General John Kelly, as White House Chief of Staff, go amid a number of staff changes. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Former Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz, Charles Lane from the Washington Post, former Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman, director of the Woodrow Wilson Center, and the co-host of Benson and Harf on Fox News Radio, Guy Benson. Well, Congressman Chaffetz, President Trump announced yesterday that John Kelly is out. His likely replacement that I discussed with Larry Kudlow, this fellow, Nick Ayers, very sharp political operative, now the White House, or the Vice President's Chief of Staff. Question, what happened to Kelly? And if, in fact, Ayers is taking over from Kelly, What does that tell us about where the Trump presidency is headed over the next 2 years?
Well, this country owes a lot to the Kelly family, the sacrifice that he has made, but also his son and the loss of his son. But he served 2 years with the Trump administration, Homeland Security, and the Chief of Staff. By all accounts, it's a tumultuous time in the White House. But we have a lot to thank there. I think Nick Ayers has proven himself with the Vice President. Very different approach, I think, than General Kelly.
In what way?
Well, he seems to be a very disciplined person. He did cut his teeth early on in some of the campaign issues. And as we transition to 2020, I think it's important to know that. I also think that perhaps one of the names that's out there is Mick Mulvaney also in the mix. It seems like Ayers is going to get it. But Mulvaney, the president, I think, signaled that there might be an interim person in the place. And
but when you say he's political, I mean, is part of it that we're headed up towards 2020?
Yeah,
we're going to have a Democratic Congress. Yeah. You need a more politically savvy person in that job?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to deal with a Democrat-controlled House of Representatives, and you couple that with the 2020 election right on our heels. I think you need somebody who can bridge that gap in what the president's attention is going to be drawn towards.
Chuck, given how President Trump runs his shop, can anyone succeed as White House Chief of Staff? And Nick Ayers, who, as I say, is a very sharp political operative. He was the executive director of the Republican Governors Association when they scored a lot of gains there. He has his own critics.
Yes, he does. He's thought to have, as part of being political, he's thought to have very sharp elbows. He's a young man in a hurry. He's only in his mid-30s, and that always draws a little resentment from the more experienced types. The other people who are in the mix here are Jared Kushner and the president's daughter, Ivanka.
When you say they're in the mix, they're not going to be chief of staff.
No, but they are known to involve themselves sometimes in the affairs of the White House, and there's may have had something to do with General Kelly's departure, too. They have struggled all along for stability in there, and, you know, at a certain point, you say to yourself, well, is it the staff or is it the president? And the president thrives, it seems, on conflict and instability. That seems to be what makes him comfortable. He likes, as I think he said himself, he likes it when people are in conflict around him, and then he can deal with that. So, you know, a best case scenario for this White House is that they find somebody who can hold on for the next 2 years till the election. But that would be different from the previous 2 years.
Well, speaking of conflict and unfinished staff business, 9 months after Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was dismissed, incidentally, by tweet, he finally got around to talking about what it was like to work for President Trump. Here's just a taste of that.
Doesn't like to read, doesn't read briefing reports, doesn't like to get into the details of a lot of things, but rather just kind of says, look, this is what I believe. When the president would say, well, here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. And I'd have to say to him, well, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law. It violates a treaty.
Well, not surprisingly, the president fired back. Tweet. Rex Tillerson didn't have the mental capacity needed. He was dumb as a rock, and I couldn't get rid of him fast enough. He was lazy as hell. Congresswoman Harman, I guess they won't be sending Christmas cards to each other this year.
Well, I have no idea why Rex Tillerson did that interview, but let me just say...
we love that he did that interview.
Well, fine. I'm glad you love it.
We like people airing their dirty
Chris,
laundry.
Congratulations on 15 years of fair and balanced anchoring of this show. Big deal.
Thank you.
Really big deal.
Thank you.
Sure
thought I was going to get through without that, but go ahead.
Well, you didn't. Okay. But now, back to this. I mean, I came of age when John Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We just buried a president where duty, honor, and country were the